Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David White, and I'm a sophomore at Old Dominion University, majoring in music. Tonight, the Boys Choir of Hampton Roads and I will be taking you all on a journey through two special periods of the 20th century, the Harlem Renaissance and the Black Arts Movement. The Harlem Renaissance was an intellectual revival of African American art and literature centered in Harlem, Manhattan, New York City, spanning the 1920s. At the time, it was known as the New Negro Movement, named after the New Negro, a 1925 anthology edited by Alain Locke. The movement also included the new African American cultural expressions across the urban areas in the Northeast and Midwest United States affected by the Great Migration, of which Harlem was the largest. Though it was centered in the Harlem neighborhood, many Francophone black writers from African and Caribbean colonies who lived in Paris were also influenced by the movement, which spanned from 1920 until the 1940s. Many of its ideas, however, lived on much, much longer. The zenith of this flowering of Negro literature, as James Weldon Johnson preferred to call the Harlem Renaissance, took place between 1924, when Opportunity, a journal of Negro life, hosted a party for black writers where many white publishers were in attendance, and 1929, the year of the stock market crash and the beginning of the Great Depression. While segregation forced control and isolation among a society, in 1919, the onset of the Harlem Renaissance promoted freedom and integration by educating whites on African American culture and fought to bring blacks and whites together during this disconnected period in American history. The music that percolated in and then boomed out of the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s was jazz, often played at speakeasies offering illegal liquor. Jazz became a great draw for not only Harlem residents, but outside white audiences also. Some of the most celebrated names in American music regularly performed in Harlem, such as Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Langston Hughes, Bessie Smith, Fats Waller, and Cab Calloway, often accompanied by elaborate floor shows. Tap dancers like John Bubbles and Bill Bojangles Robinson were also popular. During this time, some of the most prolific writers and poets in history, such as Langston Hughes, James Weldon Johnson, Alain Locke, and others, were also contributed to the Harlem Renaissance and left their own marks. Their poems and literature would be so moving that audiences would remain silent throughout and applaud uproariously afterwards. In general, the Harlem Renaissance is now known as one of the most important parts of not only African American history, but the history of the United States. So, without further ado, our first presenter for this evening will be Jody Williams presenting Langston Hughes.
Hello, my name is Jody Williams, and this is my report for the Harlem Renaissance. Langston Hughes was an author during the Harlem Renaissance. He was born February 1st, 1901. He famously wrote about the period that Negro was in vogue, which was later paraphrased as when Harlem was in vogue. Growing up in a series of Midwestern towns, Hughes became a prolific writer at an early age. He moved to New York City as a young man, where he made his career. He graduated from high school in Cleveland, Ohio, and soon began studies at Columbia University in New York City. Although he dropped out, he gained notice from New York publishers, first in the Crisis magazine and then from book publishers, and became known in the creative community of Harlem. He eventually graduated from Lincoln University. In addition to poetry, Hughes wrote plays and short stories. He also published several nonfiction works. From 1942 to 1962, as the civil rights movement was gaining traction, he wrote an in-depth weekly column in a leading black newspaper, the Chicago Defender. Like many African Americans, Hughes had a complex ancestry. Both of Hughes' great-grandmothers were enslaved African Americans, and both of his parental great-grandfathers were white slave owners in Kentucky. According to Hughes, one of these men was Sam Clay, a Scottish-American whiskey distiller of Henry County, said to be a relative of statesman Henry Clay. The other was Silas Cushenberry, a Jewish-American slave trader of Clark County. Hughes' maternal grandmother, Mary Patterson, was of African-American, French, English, and Native American descent. One of the first women to attend Oberlin College, she married Lewis Sheridan Leary, also of mixed race, before her studies. Lewis Leary subsequently joined John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in West Virginia in 1859, where he was fatally wounded. 10 years later, in 1869, the widow Mary Patterson Leary married again into the elite politically active Langston family. Her second husband was Charles Henry Langston, of African-American, Euro-American, and Native American ancestry. He and his younger brother, John Mercer Langston, worked for the abolitionist cause and helped lead the Ohio Anti-Slavery Society in 1858. After the marriage, Charles Langston moved with his family in Kansas, where he was active as an educator and activist for voting rights for African Americans. His and Mary's daughter, Caroline, known as Carrie, became a school teacher and married James Nathaniel Hughes, 1871 through 1934, and they had 2 children. The second was Langston Hughes, born in 1901 in Joplin, Missouri. His father left the family soon after the boy was born and later divorced Carrie. The senior Hughes traveled to Cuba and then Mexico, seeking to escape the enduring racism of the United States. After the separation, Hughes' mother traveled, seeking employment. Langston was raised mainly in Lawrence, Kansas, by his maternal grandmother, Mary Patterson Langston. Through the Black American oral tradition and drawing from the activist experiences of her generation, Mary Langston instilled her grandson of a lasting sense of racial pride. Imbued by his grandmother with a duty to help his race, Hughes identified with neglected and downtrodden Black people all his life and glorified them in his work. He lived most of his childhood in Lawrence. In his 1940 autobiography, The Big Sea, he wrote, "I was unhappy for a long time and very lonesome, living with my grandmother. Then it was that books began to happen to me, and I began to believe in nothing but books and the wonderful world in books, where if people suffered, they suffered in beautiful language, not monosyllables as we did in Kansas."
Next, we have Elliott Williams presenting Duke Ellington.
Good evening. My name is Elliott Williams, and tonight I'll be presenting Duke Ellington. Edward Kennedy was Duke Ellington's real name. Duke Ellington was an American composer, pianist, and leader of a jazz orchestra. He led his orchestra from 1923 until his death. His career spanned more than 6 decades. He was born in Washington, D.C. on April 29, 1899, and died on May 24, 1974, in New York, New York. Some of his famous songs include It Don't Mean a Thing and Take the A Train. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-ah, 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 do-ah. It don't mean a thing, all you gotta do is sing. Do-ah, 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 do-ah. It makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Just give that rhythm everything you got. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-ah, 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 do-ah. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-ah, 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 do-ah. It don't mean a thing, all you gotta do is sing. It makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Just give that rhythm everything you got. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-ah, 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 do-ah. Do-ah, 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 do-ah. Do-ah, 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 do-ah.
Next is Joshua Parker with his presentation on James Weldon Johnson.
My name is Joshua Parker, and I'm going to recite the creation by James Weldon Johnson. And God stepped out on space, and he looked around and said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a world. And as far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything, blacker than 100 midnights, down in a cypress swamp. Then God smiled, and the light broke, and the darkness rolled up on one side, and the light stood shining on the other, and God said, that's good. Then God reached out and took the light in his hands, and God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun. And he set that sun ablazing in the heavens, and the light that was left from making the sun got gathering up in a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, strangling the night with the moon and the stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world, and God said, that's good. Then God himself stepped down, and the sun was on his right hand, and the moon was on his left. The stars were clutched about his head, and the earth was under his feet, and God walked, and where he trod, his footsteps howled the valleys out, and floods the mountains up. Then he stopped and looked and saw that the earth was hot and buried. So God stepped over to the edge of the world, and he spat out the 7 seas. He battled his eyes, and the lightning flashed. He clapped his hands, and the thunders rolled, and the waters above the earth came down. The cooling water came down. Then the green grass sprouted, and the little wet flowers blossomed. The pine tree pointed his fingers to the sky, and the ox spread out his arms. The lakes cluttered down in the hollows of the ground, and the rivers ran down to the sea, and God smiled again. And the rainbow appeared and curled itself around his shoulder. And then God waved his arm, and then he waved his hand over the sea and over the land, and he said, bring forth, and quicker than God could drop his hand, fishes and fowls and beasts and birds swam, the rivers and the sea roamed the forests and the woods, and split the air with their wings, and God said, that's good. Then God walked around, and God looked around, and all that he had. He looked at his sun. He looked at his moon. And he looked at his little star. And he looked on his world with all its living things, and God said, I'm lonely. Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think. On the deep, wide river, he sat down with his head in his hand. God thought and thought till he thought, I'll make me a man. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the bank of the river, he kneeled him down. And there the great God Almighty, who licked the sun and fixed it in of the sky, who flung the stars to the most far corner of the night, who around the earth in the middle of his hand, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay till he shaped in it his own image. Then into it he blew the breath of life. And man became a living soul. Amen. Amen.
Up next, Cody Stiff presenting Billie Holiday.
My name is Cody Stiff, and today I will be sharing my report on Billie Holiday. Holiday was born on April 15th in 1915 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Holiday spent much of her childhood in Baltimore, Maryland with her mother, Sadie. Unfortunately for Holiday, her father was an infrequent visitor in her early life growing up. In her difficult early life, Holiday found solace in music, singing to the records of Bessie Smith and Louis Armstrong. She followed her mother and moved to New York in the late 20s, where she worked in the house of prostitution for a time. Around 1930, Holiday began singing in local clubs and renamed herself Billie after the film star Billy Duff. Striking out on her own, Holiday performed at New York's Cafe Society, where she developed some of her trademark personas, as they're wearing garniers in her hair and singing with her head tilted back. During this engagement, Holiday also debuted two of her most famous songs, God Bless the Child and Strange Fruit. The song Strange Fruit, it shows the lynching of African Americans in the 1900s. The fruit on the tree represents an African American hanging from that exact tree. She wore garniers in her hair to set herself apart from other people. Now I will sing Strange Fruit. Southern trees bear a strange fruit. Blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black body swinging in the southern breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South. The bulging eyes and the twisted mouth. Scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning blush. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the trees to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop.
We will now have Dejan Britt also presenting on Langston Hughes.
Hello, ladies. I shall now present my report, followed by my exclusive poem exclusively by Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes was a great poet, known through the Harlem Renaissance. Langston Hughes was an important part of the Harlem Renaissance, considering his art of poetry, although he is not only known for his poetry, he is also an inspiration to all African Americans. These people need a voice that should bring power to the people all around the world. Many African Americans don't have any words to say and or about the way we are treated. But Langston Hughes has changed that. He gave us an amazing purpose, a purpose that should change the way we all think. Langston Hughes has given us a powerful way of standing up to what we believe in without using negative energy towards others. And that was created through the power of his poetry. And for these reasons is why Langston Hughes was a sensational poet and an inspiration to all African Americans through the Harlem Renaissance. I shall present I Too, exclusively by Langston Hughes. I too sing to America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll eat at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. And besides, they'll see how beautiful we are and be ashamed. I too am America. My portrait of Langston Hughes.
By the height of the Harlem Renaissance in the early 20th century, the tradition of arranging African American spirituals for concert performance had strongly emerged. That tradition continued through the Harlem Renaissance and beyond, in no small part because of the work of African American composer, arranger, and singer Harry T. Burleigh. The first published collection of spirituals came out in the early 1860s. Concert arrangements of spirituals quickly proliferated, thanks in part to the groups of Jubilee singers like the famous Fisk University Jubilee Singers, ensembles dedicated to singing spirituals in public concerts. During the 1890s, Burleigh studied at New York City's National Conservatory of Music. While there, he sang to the conservatory's director, Antonin Dvorak, the melodies of some spirituals he learned from his grandfather, a former slave who had purchased his freedom. Burleigh had become one of America's great composers of art song by the time his first collection of choral arrangements of spirituals were published in 1913. Burleigh brought his skills as a song composer to bear in his first collection of spirituals arranged for solo voice and piano published in 1916. Burleigh produced most of his choral and solo voice arrangements of spirituals between 1900 and 1920. Also during this time, choirs and solo artists gave the first performances of Burleigh's concert spirituals. Renowned bass Paul Robeson, tenor Roland Hayes, contralto Marian Anderson, and even Burleigh himself were just a few of the artists who performed Burleigh's spirituals arrangements in concerts. At this time, Joshua Parker will be singing one of Burleigh's most famous spirituals, Go Down, Moses.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaohs, let my people go. When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaohs, let my people go.
At this time, I will be giving my presentation on Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong, aka Satchmo, and Pops, was an American vocalist, trumpeter, actor, and composer who is recognized as one of the most influential figures in jazz history, especially during the Harlem Renaissance. Armstrong had a significant influence on jazz music and the Harlem Renaissance movement. Born on August 4, 1901, in New Orleans, Louisiana, Armstrong was famous for his unique voice and trumpet solo. He frequently used an improvised technique of singing called scat singing, which sounds a little bit like this. Louis Armstrong came up from a poor family. He began to perform with bands all over New Orleans, from playing at funerals to many more events. In 1922, Armstrong moved to Chicago to play in a Creole jazz band. 2 years later, he relocated to New York City and began playing with the Fletcher Henderson Orchestra at the Roseland Ballroom. Around 1929, he made his first appearance on the Broadway stage, helping to pave the way for the acceptance of jazz music later on in the future. Armstrong played music up until his death at 69 years old on July 6, 1971. One of his famous songs, What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue, received extensive recognition because it raises mindfulness throughout many African Americans. Throughout the song, he expresses a sense of pathos, which you can get a feel for through the lines, What did I do to be so black and blue? By stating this, he's referring to inner feelings and outer identity imposed by society, how he's feeling blue, and his skin color, black. Being black in Harlem, America wasn't very good. It was very hard to thrive since, quote unquote, because you're black, folks think you lack. This song is an example of how a message is spread lyrically, despite providing entertainment. It's also an attempt at raising consciousness through music. For this reason, and many more reasons to name, Louis Daniel Armstrong will always be remembered as one of the greatest jazz figures of the Harlem Renaissance and of all time. To represent Louis Armstrong, I'll be singing What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue? Old empty bed, springs hard as lead, feel like old Ned, wish I was dead. All my life through, I've been so black and blue. Ooh, even the mouse ran from my house They laugh at you and scorn you too. What did I do then to be so black and blue? Ooh, I'm white inside, but that don't help my case. 'Cause I can't hide what is in my face. So sharp is woo. How will it end? Ain't got a friend. My only sin is in my skin. What did I do to be so black and blue? Scabba-dabba shooby-dooby-dooby-dooby-doo. For the second half of our program, we'll be taking a dive through the Black Arts Movement, which was a black nationalism movement that focused on music, literature, drama, and the visual arts made up of black artists and intellectuals. This was the cultural section of the Black Power movement, in that its participants shared many of the ideologies of black self-determination, political beliefs, and African American culture. Famously referred to by Larry Neal as the aesthetic and spiritual sister of Black Power, BAM applied these same political ideas to art and literature. The movement resisted traditional Western influences and found new ways to present the black experience. The poet and playwright Amiri Baraka is widely recognized as the founder of BAM. In 1965, he established the Black Arts Repertory Theater School in Harlem. Baraka's example inspired many others to create organizations across the United States. During the Civil Rights era, activists paid more and more attention to the political uses of art. The contemporary work of those like James Baldwin and Chester Himes would show the possibility of creating a new black aesthetic. A number of art groups were established during this period, such as the Umbra Poets and the Spiral Arts Alliance, which can be seen as precursors to BAM. Theater groups, poetry performances, music, and dance were centered on this movement, and therefore African Americans gained social and historical recognition in the area of literature and arts. Due to the agency and credibility given, African Americans were also able to educate others through different types of expressions and media outlets about cultural differences. The most common form of teaching was through poetry reading. African American performances were used to their own political advertisement, organization, and community issues. The Black Arts Movement was spread by the use of newspaper advertisements. The first major arts movement publication was in 1964. While these organizations were pretty short-lived, their work has had a lasting influence. And now kicking off this segment is Xavier Blunt with his presentation on Sam Cooke.
Hello, my name is Xavier Blunt, and I'll be doing a speech on Sam Cooke. How much change is enough change? How much change is enough change? What if you lived your whole life longing for change, only to find things getting worse and worse? So many questions, but not enough answers. While some may say we determine our own faith, others may say God determines our faith, or other higher powers which whom they believe in. With that being said, who really determines change? After so long, we get tired of waiting for something that may never happen. Change is what we all long for, but who is really willing to make a change? Although very few people throughout history tried to bring change amongst the world, who has truly succeeded? Samuel Cooke, known as Sam Cooke, also known as one of the pioneers and founders of music, introduces us to the struggle during the 1960s civil rights movement and his popular hit song, Change is Gonna Come. Sam Cooke was born on January 22nd, 1931. One thing that happened when Sam Cooke was alive was racism and segregation. Sam grew up as the son of a minister. One of Sam Cooke's biggest influences are Little Willie John and Nat King Cole. One decision Sam made was crossing over from gospels to pop music. One problem Sam had was his label didn't give him everything they said they were. Sam was going to go to a different record label, but unfortunately died before he could. One thing Sam did was become influential by his music and distinctive vocals. Sam Cooke prepared for his life success when he was a teenager getting ready to join a group called the Soul Stirrers. One way Sam Cooke changed the world is beyond musical boundaries. His music has been featured in movies like Spike Lee's film Malcolm X and influenced President Obama's 2008 victory speech. I'm affected by Sam Cooke by the way he grabbed his audience that actually had a message to tell. He sang songs that formed a bridge. He will always be known as the King of Soul. I was born by the river in a little tent, and oh, and just like that river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. It's been too hard to live it, but I'm afraid to die. But I don't know what's up there, yeah, beyond those skies. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. I go to the movies and I go downtown, and somebody keep telling me go, hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. Then I go to my brother. I say, brother, help me please. But anyone's up knocking me back down on my knees. Whoa, there have been times that I thought I wouldn't last so long, but now I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long
All right, next we got Elliott Williams presenting Nina Simone.
Anous Kathleen Wayman, known professionally as Nina Simone, was an American singer, songwriter, musician, arranger, and civil rights activist. Her music spanned a broad range of musical styles including classical, jazz, blues, folk, R&B, gospel, and pop. She was born February 21st, 1933 in Tyrone, North Carolina. Some of her famous songs are I Wish I Knew What It Would Be Like to Feel Free and Feeling Good. Nina Simone died on April 21st, 2003 in Carré-Lyon, France. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things that I should say. Say them loud, say them clear, for the whole round world to hear. I wish I could share all the love that's in my heart. Remove all the bars that keep us apart. I wish you could know what it means to be me. Then you'd see and agree that every man should be free. I wish I could give all I'm longing to give. I wish I could live like I'm longing to live. I wish I could do all the things that I can do. Though I'm way overdue, I'd be starting anew. Well, I wish I could be like a bird in the sky. How sweet it would be if I found out I could fly. It's over to the sun and look down at the sea. I'd sing 'cause I know, yeah. Then I'd sing 'cause I know, yeah. Then I'd sing 'cause I know how it feels. Oh, I know how it feels to be free. Yeah, yeah. How it feels. Yes, I know. Oh, I know how it feels. Oh, it feels to be free.
Now, to close out this entire program, I will be singing What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, and I watch them grow. They'll learn so much more than I'll never know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Thank you so much, folks, for joining us on this lovely evening, taking a ride with us through the Harlem Renaissance and the Black Arts Movement. We really hope you enjoyed the show.